Welcome back to another deep dive. And if you've been walking around lately with this nagging suspicion that the world hasn't just gone crazy, but that it's been deliberately engineered to drive you crazy well today,
hmm
it's going to validate a lot of those feelings.
Yeah, it really is. It is definitely not a light read for your morning commute.
No, it is not.
We are diving into this massive ebook today called Anti-Marry Queer of Feminist Dark Ages by Conrad Riker.
Right. And the author describes it as a weapon. A weaponized text designed to slash through what he calls the matrix of lies. It's heavy stuff.
It's a scalpel. He frames this work as a surgical tool because he argues that the Western psyche, specifically the male psyche, is infected. And this text is the surgery needed to cut out the rot. It is ultra long, it is incredibly incisive, and honestly, it's fascinating.
Yeah, he calls it a manual for the new manosphere. And before we wade into these waters, because trust me, they get very deep and very dark, I want to say this. If you appreciate these deep dives where we strip away the noise and look at the forbidden parts of the library, please hit that like and subscribe button right now.
Absolutely do that right now.
It helps us pierce the algorithm and keep bringing you this kind of unfiltered analysis. Our mission today is to understand the history of our institutions. Long education medicine before they were, according to the author, captured by feminists and Marxists.
And I want to be super clear up front. We're going to do our absolute best to synthesize this monster of a book, but we just can't cover everything. So if the concepts we discussed today resonate with you, if you're a guy nodding along, you need to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books and buy the ebook immediately.
You get the source material.
Right. And also follow the author at Conrad Faber on Substack. That's Riker. He treats this book as a living document, so following him there is crucial for the full picture.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Riker doesn't start with modern politics, right? He goes way further back.
Way back. If you think this is just about Republicans versus Democrats or, men versus women, you are missing the entire foundation. Riker argues that before you can understand the political culture war, you have to wrap your head around the spiritual war.
The metaphysical war.
Exactly. He calls what has happened to men in the West a metaphysical castration.
Metaphysical castration. I mean, that sets the tone right there.
Yeah.
So this ties directly into the title, The Anti-Marry.
It does. To understand his whole thesis, you have to look at his theological framework. He contrasts two major archetypes. On one side, you have the Virgin Mary, who represents the fiat.
The fiat means
Submission to divine order. The logos. It represents structure, logic, hierarchy, and objective reality. That's the foundation of Western civilization, according to Riker.
And on the flip side of that,
On the flip side is the anti-Mary. This is the archetype of Lilith or Jezebel. Riker argues this is a spirit of pure, unadulterated rebellion. It is not just about equal rights, it's a fundamental rejection of the structure of reality itself.
he says modern feminism is an occult mechanism of gynocentrism, right?
Yes. He argues it rejects the logos, the logic that actually built civilization, in favor of chaotic solipsism, where your feelings dictate reality rather than reality dictating your feelings.
Which brings us to the strategy used to enforce this rebellion. He uses a term that will definitely wake you up. Kampf.
Yeah, that's a loaded term.
I literally stopped reading for a second when I saw that. It's obviously an inversion of Hitler's manifesto. Why does he use something so explosive?
He is doing it to highlight the pure mechanics of propaganda. Riker argues that just as totalitarian regimes used mass propaganda to dehumanize a specific group to consolidate power, modern feminism uses a strategy of strategic demonization against men.
Prepping the population for a purge, basically.
Exactly. Think about traits like natural aggression, stoicism, high risk-taking, intense competition. Riker points out that these are the exact biological traits that built the skyscrapers, the power grids, the aqueducts.
But now they're toxic.
Right, toxic masculinity. Riker argues that label is a weapon. If you can convince society that masculinity itself is a pathology, a literal disease to be cured, then you have the moral justification to dismantle the patriarchy and seize its assets.
It strips the guilt away from taking his property and status.
Precisely. And that leads to his analysis of the Long March through the institutions, from the Frankfurt School all the way to your modern corporate HR department.
Because the original economic Marxists failed, right? The working class didn't revolt.
So they shifted tactics. They moved from economic Marxism to cultural Marxism. And the target shifted from the factory owner to the father. The goal became destroying the nuclear family, because if you destroy the family, you eliminate lineage and you eliminate the primary defense of private property.
And the HR department is just the enforcement arm of this.
Modern commissars, yes.
Which brings us perfectly to the money. Because Riker is clear, this isn't just a philosophy seminar, it is a heist. He calls it the parasitic economy.
The financial section of this book is just brutal. Riker presents what he calls hard data on the Pax ledger. He cites studies suggesting that over a lifetime, men are the vast majority of net positive tax contributors, meaning they pay in far more than they take out in services.
And the claim in the text is that women are net negative consumers.
In the aggregate, yes, according to Riker sources. The argument is that the state essentially transfers wealth from male labor to female consumption through wealth, healthcare, and bloated state jobs. He coins this phrase, the beta orbiter state.
The beta orbiter state, I mean, I heard beta orbiter in dating context, but applying it to the federal government is vivid.
But it fits his model perfectly.
Yeah.
He argues the government acts as a surrogate husband. It extracts resources from men by the force of taxation to subsidize single mothers and female voters.
Rendering the biological father obsolete.
Right, because the state provides the resources he used to provide, but without asking for any of the loyalty or family structure a husband would expect.
And Riker says this is the root cause of the marriage strike. Men just opting out.
It is the only logical conclusion for a rational market actor. He argues that men opting out of marriage aren't being immature Peter Pans who just want to play video games. They are looking at a contract.
Modern marriage with no-fault divorce and lifetime alimony.
Exactly. A contract where they take on a massive percentage of the risk, and the state can seize their assets at any moment. He calls opting out the Samson option.
Pulling down the pillars of the temple.
If the contract is rigged, the only winning move is not to play. And Riker uses a really fascinating Aristotelian syllogism here to completely dismantle the historical oppression narrative.
Break that down for us.
He asks this: if the patriarchy were truly a system designed by men to fundamentally oppress women for the benefit of men, why does the massive wealth transfer flow from men to women? A true tyranny extracts wealth from its victims. It doesn't subsidize them.
So the exploitation runs in the opposite direction.
That is his conclusion. Men are the host, and the current gynocentric system is the parasite. Now, we are just reporting on his framework here, but you can see how methodical his logic is.
But the attack isn't just on the wallet. Riker goes into biology, and this is where the deep dive gets genuinely alarming for anyone paying attention. The war on testosterone.
This is where the metaphysical war becomes intensely physical. The text cites data showing a 1% annual decline in testosterone levels in Western men. A man today has significantly less testosterone than his grandfather did at the exact same age.
And he attributes this to environmental factors, right? Plastics, xenoestrogens.
Plastics, bad diets full of seed oils, but also a medical system that is entirely complicit in this decline.
Because a low testosterone male is docile.
A high testosterone male is hard to govern. He is risk tolerant, he pushes back against authority. A low T male is a compliant consumer. Riker argues this is a feature of the system, not a bug.
And he connects this directly to the education system, what he calls the school of lies.
Yes, the Lilith curriculum. It is not just about removing dead white men from the history books, it is about pathologizing boyhood itself. Riker points out that normal high-energy boy behavior, roughhousing, competition, questioning rules is now diagnosed as a clinical disorder.
The ADHD industrial complex.
We are chemically gelving young males, drugging them with amphetamines like Ritalin and Adderall just to make them sit still in a Prussian model classroom environment that is totally unsuited to their biology. We drug them to make them act like compliant girls.
And then he goes even darker with the medical establishment when he talks about the transition of children.
He views the trans child phenomenon strictly through the lens of that anti-Mary archetype we discussed. It is a fundamental rejection of the binary biological order of nature, but practically financially, he sees it as a massive lifetime revenue stream for Big Pharma.
He throws out a huge figure for that.
Over $1.2 million per patient over a lifetime. The text literally calls it a satanic ritual of mutilation.
Wow.
He argues that the medical establishment actively suppresses data on detransitioners because admitting that biological gender is immutable would completely destroy the anti-Mary narrative that feelings create reality.
It is a full spectrum attack. Spiritual, economic, biological. And then, of course, there's the legal system. Riker has an entire chapter on the legal labyrinth where he breaks down how justice has been inverted.
He analyzes something called standpoint epistemology. This is the academic theory that lived experience and subjective feelings trump objective facts. Riker tears this apart. He argues that the Believe All Women movement is the ultimate real-world expression of this inverted logic.
He brings up the Rolling Stone UVA rape hoax as a case study.
It is the perfect case study. Riker points out that the narrative was believed instantly by everyone, even when the specific details of the story were physically impossible. Why? Because the anti-Mary archetype is the eternal victim. She must be believed regardless of physical evidence.
He also mentions the Dear Colleague letter under the Obama administration, right? Lowering the standard of evidence for Title IX.
Essentially turning college campuses into kangaroo courts where the accused has almost no due process.
He talks about the Gish Gallop, too, which is a debate term.
It is a strategy of throwing out so many accusations so rapidly, calling someone toxic, misogynist, privileged, fragile, that the accused cannot possibly refute them all using logic.
It just overwhelms reason with emotional buzzwords.
Riker says this is the default mode of modern feminist discourse. Overwhelm the man with noise so he cannot use his logos to defend his position.
And this legal environment bleeds directly into the dating market. If the legal system is a minefield, the dating apps are a total wasteland. The dating market apocalypse.
He applies the Pareto principle here, the 80-20 rule, although on apps like Tinder it is probably more like 95-5 now.
Women competing for the top tiny percentage of men, while the average man is completely invisible.
Riker argues this is a monopsony, a market with basically only one buyer, the collective female choice dictating terms to a massive surplus of sellers.
And this connects to the shit test paradigm.
Crucial concept. He argues that modern women use the legal system and emotional manipulation to continuously test a male's frame. It is a subconscious biological drive to find a strong leader.
But the system is rigged.
Exactly. It's a double bind. If he fails the test and capitulates, he proves he is weak, and she loses respect for him.
But if he passes the test,
If he passes it, if he asserts dominance and holds his frame, he is instantly labeled toxic, and the machinery of the state steps in to punish him. It is a literal lose-lose scenario for the modern man.
and Riker says this mathematical reality is why we have incels.
Right. He is very clear that incels are not some organized terrorist movement. They are a math problem.
A sociological result.
If you entirely deregulate the sexual marketplace and culturally enforce hypergamy, you inevitably end up with a massive underclass of disenfranchised young men. Riker sees them as the canaries in the coal mine. They are just the first warning sign that the civilization is mathematically collapsing.
Okay, so we have laid out a metaphysical war, a parasitic economy, a biological attack, and a rigged legal and sexual marketplace. It sounds incredibly bleak. But Riker claims this book is a manual for the new manosphere. He doesn't just say give up, he offers an actual exit strategy.
He does. The entire last third of the book is about building what he calls the New Jerusalem. And it all starts with the individual mind. He advocates for building the Stoic shield.
I really like the practical advice here, the gray rock method.
It is a highly effective technique for dealing with what he calls emotional vampires, or the chaotic energy of the anti-Mary. You just become a gray rock, you make yourself uninteresting, unresponsive, you don't engage in the drama, you don't react.
You deny them the emotional fuel.
Exactly. Riker talks about building an inner citadel where your baseline self-worth is stored safely away from the absolute chaos of the culture.
And then using logic offensively as a weapon. Define your terms.
That is his syllogistic sword. When someone accuses you of toxic masculinity, Riker says, stop, do not apologize, do not get defensive or angry. Simply ask them to define it calmly.
Ask for a definition that somehow excludes ambition and strength.
He argues that these feminist arguments completely collapse the moment you demand rigorous definitions. They rely entirely on ambiguity and emotional manipulation to survive. Once you force them into the light of logos, the argument dies.
But he goes way beyond just mental defense. He talks about building parallel structures.
This is the massive action phase of his manual. Riker argues that you cannot fix the current system from within. It is far too corrupted. You have to starve the beast.
Which means an economic exit strategy.
Yes. He is very bullish on Bitcoin and crypto. He links fiat currency money just printed out of thin air based on nothing to the feminine magical thinking of the state.
Wow, that's an interesting parallel.
He argues men absolutely need to build their own economic engines that the state cannot arbitrarily seize, because if you hold your wealth in their fiat system, the system owns you.
This sounds very MGTOW adjacent, men going their own way. But Riker takes it further than just isolation.
He completely reframes MGTOW. He says it is not about sulking in a basement avoiding women. He views it as a strategic labor strike. A unified refusal to provide the tax base and the resources that keep the gynocentric system running.
Building a manosphere Jerusalem.
Trade guilds, private educational networks, parallel economies where merit and logic actually rule.
He calls for a 1,000-year era of reason.
Civilization rebuilt entirely on logos. Logic, merit, biological reality, hierarchy. He calls for men to become architects of destiny, to stop apologizing for the perceived sins of the past and just start building the future.
There was that one line that really stood out. I will not apologize for the sins of men I never met.
That is the absolute core of his operating philosophy. Reject the collective guilt entirely. Reclaim your competence.
So what does this all mean for the listener right now? What is the actual end game Riker predicts?
Well, if we pull back and look at the macro picture, Riker is essentially making a historical prophecy. He believes the gynocentric state is mathematically unsustainable. It fundamentally consumes more resources than it produces. He compares our current era directly to the Weimar Republic.
Meaning it is going to collapse under its own weight.
That is his firm prediction. The math won't hold, and when it does collapse, it will offer a massive opportunity for the remnant.
The remnant being the men who prepared.
The men who kept their heads, who kept their resources out of the fiat system, and who maintained their physical and mental strength. He sees this coming collapse not as a tragedy to fear, but as a necessary forest fire to clear out the cultural rot so a new society based on merit can grow.
So the goal isn't to try and save this current world, but to be ready to architect the next one.
Exactly. Riker argues that the future always belongs to those who actually show up. Not the ones complaining on the internet, but the ones building real-world structures. The ultimate question he leaves the reader with is, are you going to be a passive victim of the decline or the architect of the next golden age?
Powerful stuff. Look, guys, we have only scratched the surface of this text here. This book is incredibly dense, with history, philosophy, and economic data that we just couldn't fit into a single deep dive. If this conversation sparked something in you, if you want to see the full blueprints for this new Jerusalem, you need to get the source material.
Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now. Search for Anti-Mary Queer of Feminist Dark Ages by Conrad Riker. It is a long read, but Riker would argue it is absolutely necessary armor for surviving the modern world.
And do not forget to follow him at Conrad Riker on Substack. He is putting out fresh articles that expand on these exact themes constantly, and you will want to be plugged into that network as things develop.
And just one final thought to leave you with. We talked a lot about Riker's vision for reclaiming the logos and building this new era of reason. But historically speaking, the pendulum of civilization swings hard. If this current system does collapse and the remnant takes over, the overcorrection could be incredibly fierce. It makes you wonder what new blind spots the architects of that next world might create without even realizing it. Something to mull over.
Definitely something to think about. If you value these deep dives that aren't afraid to go into the dark, challenge the mainstream narrative, and look at the text people are actually talking about behind closed doors, please like and subscribe to the show. It helps us pierce that algorithm of censorship Riker talks about, and it keeps us on the air bringing this to you. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next deep dive.